Our presenter here is Ruchir Garg, excuse me. He has a long history in the software world, software development, software testing, software support, but majority of his time has been spent focused on software quality. He's currently a security architect at Intel Security, and with that, I'll turn it over to him. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. So, how many developers are in the room? I see a few. Good. So have you ever used third-party libraries in your software? I'm sure yes, right? So it's integral part of modern software, and we really can't build a modern software without using a third-party library. We can, technically, but it's not going to help us because the cost is going to be exponentially high to it. So how often we overlook the management of third-party libraries? It's not fire and forget like military. It needs to be kept track of. And if we lose track of management of third-party libraries, we run into issues. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about a couple of issues that we ran into and how we overcome those issues and what are the recommended steps to take to overcome those kind of issues. So these libraries, they seem very harmless to use once it serves the functionality, is easy to integrate, but they have the potential of springing up surprises when you least expect it. Let's see how. So anybody recognize this vehicle? Yeah, but see, it's running on wagon wheels. So consider your software as the fancy software as this vehicle, but the third-party libraries it's using is just wagon wheels. Do you expect it to go fast, smooth? That's how it matters. So I don't want to say the other way around that the wheels are our software and the vehicle is the third-party libraries, because we love our software, right? Whatever we build. So let's just call the vehicle as our software and the wheels as the third-party libraries. And we use them because we don't want to reinvent the wheels. But not these wheels. We want them to be really, really nice rubberized wheels, right? So don't reinvent the wheels. Use third-party libraries, but with caution. I'm going to talk about those cautions. So the agenda for today is I'll cover the reason why we manage third-party libraries. Some real-world examples. Most of the presentation is going to be around real-world examples rather than a theory. So all these examples have been accumulated through my experience as a security lead. So I handle a lot of vulnerabilities coming in from the field. So most of these vulnerabilities happen to be related to the third-party libraries. So that's a very important aspect that we need to keep in mind when we think about managing such libraries. And few best practices. So I already mentioned that it's an indispensable part of any modern software. And I'll also refer to that indiscriminate usage that happens today. Most of the time, no offenses, but developers just pick up a library that works and integrate, and not giving enough importance to the aspects like this, the manageability of those libraries. How good is that library managed? Does the library has vulnerability identified? How many vulnerabilities were identified and how many vulnerabilities have been fixed? Or does the current version of the library is even maintained? So those are the many aspects that need to be taken care of before we pick a library to integrate. I also mentioned that vulnerability management is very important, but it's mostly overlooked unless a company is really, really good into security. But that thing needs to be developed in most of the organizations, that you need to have an active vulnerability management program. So I'll talk about that later also. When we use libraries, we expect updates to it. And those updates might come in form of defect fixes, vulnerability fixes, or feature additions. So updates, we can't avoid them. Those updates might bring in additional problems like API changes. So if there are an API change, you need to make those changes in your source. Platform deprecations, most of the software we use today are supported across platforms, majority of platforms. So is there a platform deprecation coming in with the newer version of the library? That's very important. You might have very unhappy customers there if you don't consider that aspect. And in case that something is like that is coming in with a new version, you need to plan for it. Do you call end of support to that platform? It's a business call. Or otherwise, you can switch to an alternative library. You have to take that call. End of support. Very important, but mostly overlooked. You integrate a library, and you forget it. When the time comes, you need to provide a patch, an updated patch to the customers. You go look for the updated version of the library. It just does not exist because the library went end of support last year. What do you do in such cases? You're running against time. You have 1 month to provide the hotfix, and you don't have the library. So the failure to manage these third-party libraries, as I mentioned, may lead to multiple hotfixes to your customers. So if you don't upgrade to the latest, every time there is a vulnerability from the field, you need to give out a hotfix. So the hotfixes increases if you don't manage them better. You need to be on the latest version all the time. Otherwise, the vulnerability backlog is going to just build up. Unhappy customers, if you delay and if you fail to provide a security patch to your customers in time, they're going to be unhappy. Same applies to platform deprecations, as I mentioned earlier. Delayed product releases, hotfixes are generally the reasons behind we have delayed product releases. For example, you have a release coming in 1 month, and 1 week before the release, you have a vulnerability, high severity vulnerability, for which you have an SLA of 1 week. What would you do? Would you deliver that hotfix, or would you deliver your release on time? Resources are limited. The team is the same. The engineering team, you can't add in new members overnight. So that's a tough call. Lawsuits, exaggeration, but not ruled out. Why? I'll tell you. Because if you have a software which is vulnerable in the customer systems, and that customer systems get compromised because of any other software, and even if that is a third-party library that caused that vulnerability window, the customer is not going to accept that argument that it was a third-party library. They'll say, your software did it. And they might take you to the legal. They may take the legal recourse. It's an exaggeration, but yeah, not ruled out. So the first example I'll take is the enumeration. So when we say management of third-party libraries, this is the first step and the most important one, without which nothing works. So let's take a problem wherein a new high-severity vulnerability has been reported for a third-party library, let's say X, which has been shipped along with your product. I'll use this example for multiple slides because this is the most common scenario that I have experienced in my current work. So now the problem is defined. The solution is pretty simple. Upgrade to X to the latest version, which has the fix, and ship out the hotfix. It sounds so simple, right? But can we do it? Let's say the team decided that, yeah, this has to be done, but no. Nothing was done because the engineering team was unaware that library was even used in the product. Multiple reasons. That library was integrated by some developer who left the organization 3 years ago, and now the current engineering team has no idea that it's been used. We run into issues. Again, it all rolls back to unhappy customers, possible lawsuits. But yeah, recommendation. Can we recommend something for it? Yeah. Enumerate all the libraries that you use in your software and keep the list updated with every product release. Because every product release, you might be making some changes to it. You might be upgrading the version or adding a new library, removing a new older library. Keep all track of all those changes and have a list ready. And Excel will do. That's what I do currently. I manage everything in Excel. But that's the most critical step. The next example, same example, but it's vulnerability tracking. So now you have all the libraries enumerated, and the same issue happens. You have a new vulnerability from the field. Now, are you safe? No. Because again, you failed to release any hotfix, because even though you knew that you have those libraries using your product, but nobody was tracking the vulnerabilities from the field. How many of you have an active vulnerability tracking program in your organization? One. Yeah. So that says it, right? So how important it is. If you don't track the vulnerabilities used in your software, you're going to run into issues. The version of the software that is running at the customer system is vulnerable. And it is an open book. Anybody can exploit it. Possibility. I'm not saying that it will get exploited, but there's a possibility it may get exploited. And if it does, who is to be blamed? It's a serious issue. And especially for the security industry, it's a big challenge. And we take it very, very seriously. I'm sure everybody has to take that very, very seriously. Recommendation: everybody should track the vulnerabilities actively. Either the engineering team does it, if you have the bandwidth, or ideally, you should have a centralized team which does it at the organization level. So at Intel, we do it at the organization level. We have a dedicated team which tracks all these vulnerabilities, and we have defined SLAs. So based on the vulnerability severity, we have certain defined SLAs, and we have to take action within those SLAs. How do you do it? There are a couple of resources. Anybody aware of National Vulnerability Database? Okay, so I have a link in my presentation referring to that. So that database basically manages, or it's a centralized database managed by it's a kind of an organization which manages all these vulnerabilities. So they have vulnerabilities listed against all the third-party libraries, known third-party libraries. Not all, but the major ones. So if you can look up your library, and it will show you that how many vulnerabilities exist based on the version. So that will give you a good idea where you stand currently. So as an activity, I think you should start from that point. Look where you stand, how many vulnerabilities exist in your product, and take it from there. Other resources that you can use is the direct websites of the library. So my libraries, they are managed well. They do publish vulnerability list often, as and when they come in on their website. So like, for example, OpenSSL, they come in every 3 months. And they have a very comprehensive vulnerability reporting program. So look up their websites if you don't find the info on the NVD site, and that will give you tons of information. They'll also tell you how to fix those vulnerabilities if you look up on the library websites. Scanners. So anybody used any vulnerability scanners to scan their software? Good. So Nessus is one. So I'm not recommending Nessus, but there are multiple softwares available in the market which you can use. There are free tools available too. So I'll recommend that you scan your software using those scanners, and that will throw up the vulnerabilities that exist in those libraries that you use. That's pretty cool, pretty easy. Now, going ahead in the same journey, now you have all the list of libraries, and you also have an active vulnerability program, and another vulnerability hits you. What do? Still not safe, because the latest library has some API changes. And generally, whenever these vulnerabilities come in, you have very little time to react and ship out the fixes. So if you have an API changes coming in, the new version of the library, do you think it's going to be easy to make those changes and test it out within those SLAs? Difficult. So what do? Recommendation is keep updating the libraries incrementally and don't let the version difference. The version difference I mean to say is the version used in your product as well as the latest version available in the field. So typically, if there is a major version change, major version difference between the latest available and your used, they are bound to be API changes. But minor versions are typically safe, but there's no hard line to it. You really can't guarantee anything there. Platform deprecations, yes, you can also encounter platform deprecations, as I mentioned. So general recommendation is stick to the latest. Whenever you get an opportunity, you are going through a major release, ensure that you go to the latest version of all the libraries that you use. That will keep you safe for longer, rather than shipping out frequent hotfixes. Now, going ahead in the same example, now you also have the latest version used in your product, and then a new vulnerability hits you. It appears quite safe, right? That we are quite safe. We are at the latest version of the library. We have active vulnerability management program. Nothing can go wrong. But that's not the case. What about the support considerations? What if the library that you upgraded to the latest last year in your last major release is no longer maintained anymore? The support ended last January. Now you are in October and you need a fix. Issues. What do? You have to look for an alternative in such case. And identifying a new alternative library in such short notice and integrating in, testing and releasing, it's not going to happen within a short time. So keeping track of the support timelines is very critical. I ran into such issues. So we had a product running in the field and the library that we were using went end of support. We had to pay a lot of money to buy extended support. It costed our organization too much because we didn't have the bandwidth to go to a new library. That was even costlier. Ever thought about these aspects? These are challenging. Okay, recommendation. Have a system in place to pick libraries that are actively maintained. That's given that any library that is actively maintained only should be picked. Even if the library is recommended very well, it works, but there is no maintenance, active maintenance happening to it, stay away from those libraries. Also, I'd also say stay away from libraries which are like single author open source libraries. Controversial, but yes, true. There's one guy who's written it and he's the only one responsible for maintaining it. He may choose not to do that anytime. What would you do then? Yeah, but that's reinventing the wheel. Again, another thing is, do you use commercial libraries? Yeah, you can. But again, things to be kept in mind there is how well they are going to support you. In your support contracts, have you discussed or negotiated extended support? How much is going to cost you? What kind of testing practices they follow when you buy something from off the shelf from any vendor? Do you even question them that do you perform security testing and do you run static analysis on your source before giving me the library? These are the questions that we need to ask to understand how well that library has been written and tested. Otherwise, software security is something that you just need one weak link. That could be that third-party library which you are integrating. So be wary of that and take the right decision. One thing is, I'll also recommend here is selection of libraries should not be ad hoc. It should ideally not be done at the team level. Even if you do evaluate those libraries on the aspects, as I mentioned earlier, the maintainability, the testing practices adopted by that organization, and how actively the vulnerabilities have been tracked and reported against that library. One thing is, if you happen to use a library and you don't find any vulnerability against that doesn't make it safe. That's even more dangerous than having 100 vulnerability listed against it. That only means that nobody's looking into the vulnerabilities into that library. That's all it means. It's better to pick a library against which there are numerous vulnerabilities listed, but it's also addressed in time. That is a much better library compared to a library which has no vulnerabilities. You can do it at the organization level. Like at Intel, we have a whitelisting team which does this for us. So the engineering comes up with a recommendation of the library that we plan to use, and we take it to the whitelisting team, which evaluates all those libraries based on these various parameters and come back with a recommendation whether we are good to go or not. If they say no, then they also specify reasons behind it. Mostly it is like no vulnerabilities reported and or poor maintenance. So that takes care of a lot of issues. So, and it also kind of makes the usage of such library uniform across the organizations. So you can always go to the whitelisting site and see what libraries are whitelisted, and if you can pick one of those rather than doing all your research and then going back to them and then coming back as blacklisted, you can't use it. It's double work. So they do recommend alternative libraries also in case yours is blacklisted. So that's pretty good program to have. Consider having it in your organization, if not at the organization level, at least in the engineering level, in the team level. If those aspects are evaluated before the library is selected for integration, you'll save a lot of hassles going forward. Okay. I already covered this, but again, re-emphasizing the same problem that the quality of the third-party library really matters. So in case there is a buffer overflow vulnerability and somebody exploits it, and that happens to be third-party library, your organization might get sued. So recommendation is pretty simple, but again, it's debatable that how do you ascertain the quality in the third-party libraries? It's easier said than done, because it could be an open source or a closed source library. If it's open source, kind of becomes easy that you can run the source through some static analysis to the minimum to uncover such issues like integer overflow, buffer overflow. But if it happened to be a closed source library, what would you do? You really don't have much options. So recommendation is, at least even if it is closed source library, I'll take the example of RSA. We use RSA. The source is not available to us, but we ask questions. How does RSA test that library before giving it to us? Ask those questions. Look up reports. You can ask the data. Can you give me any data? How did you really test it? If you don't go by the words, you can ask for the data, and if they want to really sell that library to you, they will give you that data. And beyond that, there is something that we can also do if you have the expertise in your organization, which is penetration testing. So penetration testing is, we don't need any information as such, the prior information to perform penetration testing. So as a hacker or as a white hat, you can perform a penetration testing on such libraries to evaluate whether they are really safe. Are there anything very obvious which is lurking around, which could be exploited? So you'll get some idea, but that's something very technical and you should have expertise to do that. But at the minimum, asking questions is what I recommend. Priorities. Take the example that you are using an older version of the library since long time and you choose to upgrade it to the latest version this time around. The engineer takes the call, okay, we'll upgrade it. We'll get rid of all these vulnerability backlogs, and we'll just go to the latest version. But can the engineering take that call? I don't think so. Management. So the management doesn't give you a go-ahead, and they focus you, they ask you to focus on the priority set by them. And this backlog remains a backlog. Nothing works. So the management commitment is very, very critical. If they don't invest in this, it's not going to work. This program needs management commitment. They need to understand that not being on the latest version of the library is so risky. Though in the short run it may not seem to be, but in the long run, when you have to release multiple hotfixes, the existing releases are delayed, and you're going out multiple hotfixes. I'll take the example. My product released 6 hotfixes in a year just for managing vulnerabilities. That was too much. But so when the management takes this call, they need to understand the cost associated with these hotfixes. So once they understand the value, I'm sure they will support it. My management does support me now, but yeah, talk to the management. Any managers here? Product managers? Good. Okay. So product managers need to understand this aspect, that it's going to work in their favor rather than anybody else's. So I'll talk about a typical life cycle of a third-party library through some graphic and the best practices. To reiterate what I have just explained and spoken through all the examples, library selection is the most important thing. Stringent selection process is required, as I mentioned, either at the engineering level or the organization level. Do give the required due diligence, do give the required attention it requires before choosing a library. You might already be having a lot of libraries in your product, but whenever you get an opportunity to change anything, do this and then change. Active security incident response program, either at the organization or team level. Do track all the vulnerabilities coming in from the field in your libraries. It could be, I'll tell you, when you start this program, you will be really amazed to see how many vulnerabilities you are really carrying right now in the field. Have this program, and over a period of time, your customers are going to be much happier. Once they know that you have this program and you're really keeping them safe, they'll be much happier. Your NPS scores might go shoot. Management commitment, as mentioned. Product management, engineering, they need to work together to get this done. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Yeah, so this is quite self-explanatory, but just for the reference, if you want to refer to the typical life cycle after this presentation, the first step, as I mentioned, is evaluation. Do a stringent evaluation and then integrate. Once you integrate, you ensure that you are testing that library to whatever extent possible. It depends on the library. So you might be testing some of the libraries much more than the others. So if you have a library which is commercially shipped to you by a seller, you might want to focus lesser there and focus more on the open source library that you picked up from the GitHub. Focus more there. So you need to take a call how much you're going to invest in that direction, but do consider that. Enumeration, once you have tested it out and you're quite sure that you're going to use and ship this library, enumerate in that list which you are going to maintain. along with the version numbers. Then it's a recurring cycle of management. Management is vulnerability management. I mean to say, management of the vulnerabilities, management of the new versions coming in of that library. It's an ongoing process to keep a track of it. And once you have a newer version available, you take a call whether the support is going to continue for some time or not. Is it going to end any soon? 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, you move away from that library because that's a red flag. So you evaluate the support consideration if you have a newer version. Every time you have a newer version, look at the support timelines. So if it's really supported for quite a while, more than 6 months, yeah, you can go to the updated version. And once you go to the updated version, it goes back to the test cycle. You test it again. Have they introduced something new there, which is going to hurt you? Otherwise, if it's a no, then it's not going to be supported any longer. You go back to the evaluation stage and look for alternatives. That's about it for me today. Thank you. So here are the tools that I was mentioning. The first one is the National Vulnerability Database. So you can look up the vulnerabilities against the library used on this site. And so the other one is the Vulnerability Scanner. It's a paid tool. Sorry to say, but it's a paid tool, but it's a pretty good one that you can also look up some free tools there, which does the same job. Thank you. You can reach out to me anytime if you have any questions, and you can ask me any questions you have right now.
So I can imagine that you'd be potentially in a situation where you're at the mercy of multiple library vendors. And say if you've got like 10 libraries that you're including, and they're all releasing at different schedules.
Yeah.
And having, I mean, you can they can produce a lot of work that you have to do and keep up with in order to try to stay out away from the vulnerabilities.
Right.
Is there any way to balance it out?
Yeah. We ran into the same issue where we were getting multiple fixes, multiple updates from various vendors. We went crazy. Like after releasing 6 hotfixes in a year, we went crazy. Like it's not going to work. This has to stop. How do we do it? So we decided among ourselves that we'll have kind of a training strategy where we'll only ship out security fixes once a quarter if there is something really severe pending. Otherwise, it becomes once a 6 month.
So it's basically risk versus.
Yeah. So you take a call there. It depends upon the severity of the vulnerabilities or how serious it is. If it is manageable, you can push it out to 6 months to reduce your number of hotfixes. Otherwise, you take it up earlier as and when required. It's possible that we also have a caveat that if something really burning comes up, we'll release it in 1 week. That's the only way we can balance it out. And if we happen to have taken care of the selection criteria early on without running into this mess, we probably would be much better off than we currently are. But getting rid of all the buggy libraries in the source is not that easy because it's going to take time. It's not going to take time. Multiple major product updates before we reach there. It's a long journey, but it has to start at some point. Cool. Any more questions?
Do any commercial third-party library people, do they ever provide tools, like say they were to change a bunch of aspects of the API, do they just kind of print those in a list and hand them to you, or are there any tools that do some kind of static analysis on your code and say, oh, we've changed this?
Changing a third-party library is dicey because it depends upon what kind of legal agreements that are associated with that library. So if it's allowed as per the legal, I'm not good at legal, so I will not commit more on that. So if it's allowed, and you are required to contribute back to the community. Let's say you borrowed some source from some vendor, and it's an open source. You run through some static analyzers. You figured out that there are defects, and you fix it. Then, as per the GPL licenses, I guess you have to contribute back to the community. You have to provide the fixes to the community. It works in such cases, but if it's a paid library, then and if it is, even if the source is available, you can only request the vendor to make those changes. You can't make them. Otherwise, violates the licenses, right? And it becomes even more difficult going forward when you want to upgrade. If you make any changes and there is an upgraded version coming in, it's going to overwrite all those changes. You have to do it again. How long can you continue doing that? And important thing that I just recall is customizing third-party libraries. It's very dangerous. Don't hardcode third-party libraries. Don't couple them tightly to your source. Otherwise, upgrading them becomes kind of virtually impossible. There's a lot of work there. So keep it loosely coupled to make it keep it more manageable. Any more questions?
Closed source third-party libraries, have there been instances where you've actually considered a source license?
You mean?
Getting a source license for the library?
No, not yet.
I was wondering if you manage the knowledge of those libraries in the same way you manage like the version information. If someone proposes to add a new library, but you say, oh wait, we already have this one over here that can do that. Who is the one who steps in and says, we don't need that new library, we already have one that has that capability? And who keeps track of all the knowledge of everything contained in all those libraries?
You mean to say the enumerated list?
Yeah, the enumerated list.
Generally, in my team, I manage that. But if you don't have anybody who can actually do that, architects are the best person to do that. And they can take the better call, like whether to use this one or that one, which version to use. They are the best people. Let it be with architects. It's ultimately their decision, which library to use, which version to use. But when I mention about the criteria of selection, they need to implement it. And only the library that actually passes that criteria needs to be used. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Are we done?
All right, let's give Ruchir one more hand.
Thank you.